welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I am your host, JP. John Paz with me today. Very special guest, very rare guest. He's, of course, a former Smoky Mountain Wrestling employee, Mr. Casey O'Connor. Casey, welcome to two-man power trip. How you doing?
John, great. Thank you so much for having me tonight. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your listeners, and looking forward to talking about one of my favorite promotions with you tonight. So thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it.
No problem. We'll talk a little Smoky Mountain, but what have you been up to today? Where are you at? What are you doing?
So currently, I live in Wyoming. I live right outside of Yellowstone National Park. I've pretty much been here since I left Tennessee in '94, so almost 30 years now. Got a house full of kids. Well, I got two out the door and one almost, and so just enjoying a beautiful summer, and that's pretty much, yeah. So we, just living the good life out here in the middle of nowhere.
How the heck did you get out there?
So I just, I grew up in North Carolina, and I read about Yellowstone and the cowboys and all that, and I really wanted to come out here after college. And I came out. I had a couple buddies that were in Jackson, Wyoming for the summer, and I told my parents, I said, hey, I'm going to go out there for a few days and check it out. And I think I was here like 10 minutes, and I called my mom and dad and said, you can put my stuff in a box. I'm not coming back. And
Wow.
I just fell in love with it. I just, as a kid, wanted to be a cowboy. In Cody, Wyoming, I know Eric Bischoff is up there, and I'm
Yep.
actually surprised I haven't bumped into him because it's a pretty small town. But worked on a couple ranches and just loved it, and loved it's just a beautiful country. It's just the Tetons and Yellowstone and the animals. It's just spectacular. Had no desire to go back east to the humidity and the mosquitoes and the mass amount of people. I just enjoyed it. It's been a great place to raise my family, and been happy here ever since.
Nice. Very cool. With being out there, you a big Western guy? I know you said you like cowboys. You watching a lot of old Westerns?
I used to when I was a kid. That was the thing. I grew up on the tail end of the Bonanza and the Gunsmoke and the last couple bit of John Wayne movies, and then of course some of the early Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns. So yeah, I grew up in the suburbs. I grew up. My dad was a golf pro, so I was on a golf course in the suburbs in the South, and came out here and kind of bluffed my way into a job in a horse ranch, and just told the guy, I could saddle and ride in the rain. I've been riding my whole life. I'd never ridden anything but a pony at the fair, but I took to it and enjoyed it. And just like I said, just never wanted, I had never desired to go anywhere else, at least not full time. So.
I love that life. Never been out there, but I love that. Like, I know, I just love the cowboys. I like that lifestyle out there. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's nice.
yeah, it's very laid back. If you've been east, and I love the east. I don't have any complaints. I'm not one of those haters, but there was just something about a state with 500,000 people. That was a whole state. There's hardly anybody. I live in a town of like 7,000 people in the mountains. It's just a great, relaxed, good life, and especially the last few years during COVID, it was a good place to kind of hide when the rest of the world was getting a little chaotic.
Yep.
And so yeah,
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's just been great, and I do kind of miss the beach. Having grown up near the coast, and I do miss the beach a lot. I've been landlocked for a long time now, and I threaten when my youngest graduates high school that I will move somewhere, maybe back to North Carolina or the Panhandle of Florida, and spend my last days sitting in the sun, a little copper tone on my nose, and working for some tan feet. That's my life goal: tan feet once I retire. So
Nice. I like
yeah.
that. Have you done anything wrestling related since like you moved out there or no?
No, no, and it's kind of, like my kids have no concept of it either because there's nothing out here really. Um, when I got out of it in the summer of '94, into '94, I you can remind me of this later. I'll wrap. I got a great Undertaker story and some advice he gave me, and so when he gave me that advice, I just never went back. And to the point where I've been to one house show. They came out here once to cash. WWE did.
Hmm.
And this was right during Kane and Katie Vick era.
Oh boy.
So I remember being really hopped up because I was hoping we were going to get Triple H and Rob Van Dam because they were just starting to go that way on the shows. And I was really excited to see Rob Van Dam. Flair was on that night. It was my last night ever seeing him live. He did like a street fight with Jericho. And but unfortunately, we didn't get Triple H and Rob Van Dam. We got the last of the Kane Triple H matches off that feud. But that was so whenever that was, I still have my ticket stub somewhere, but I believe that was probably
Oh,
2002.
two. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been a long, and I know they've been out one other time, and they come to Salt Lake, which is about 5 hours, and Billings and Denver. Those are all about a 5 hour drive for me, but I'm not. Like I said, I had my experience. I got what I wanted. I really wanted to work for an old territory, and I got that, and then decided to go have a normal life. So
Yes, yes, get
yeah,
out of that
yeah,
crazy business. But
it was
You mentioned North Carolina, and obviously, Flair country, where you grew up, right? Which Greensboro area. So, were you
correct.
just a lifelong wrestling fan that wanted to get into the business? Is that basically what happened?
Pretty much, yeah. I had the very good fortune of being born in Greensboro, and like a lot of kids, I'm flipping the channels after cartoons one Saturday, and I see this big blonde guy beating up this Hawaiian looking guy, and I don't know what I'm seeing. My dad watched boxing, but we never watched wrestling. I didn't know anything about it, and it turned out to be the kickoff of the original Flair Steamboat rivalry, where Ric Flair's mauling Ricky Steamboat in the studio, rubbing his face in. But it's actually the follow up show a few weeks later when Steamboat gets his revenge, where he comes out, slaps Flair around when Flair's in his suit with his women, one of which was Bonnie Steamboat, the future Bonnie Steamboat. Steamboat throws him in the ring and bumps him around, strips him down to his tidy whities, and that was like my first 15 minutes intro to wrestling was Flair and Steamboat, that scenario, that Flair mauling him and Steamboat getting his revenge, and I was just like, I don't know what this is, but this is the greatest thing I've ever seen, and so I stuck with it. And of course, this is pre-cable TV, so you only got at this time the TV show of your area. If you lived in Texas, you watched Texas. Florida, you watched Florida. In Greensboro, you watched Mid Atlantic. And my mom had a job downtown at a law firm. She'd take me down sometimes on the weekends. And this was back when you had newsstands. Before every gas station was a convenience store, you'd have a little newsstand where you go in, you buy your newspaper, a pack of cigarettes, a Coke, or whatever. And I found out, and again, I'm like 8 or 9 years old, this guy had a big magazine display with all the aftermags. And this was a great era, the late 70s. This is Bloody Abdul on the cover, Bloody Dusty on the cover, Bloody Terry. Everybody's bloody.
Yes,
And
yes.
I would go down there. My mom wouldn't give me money for the magazines, but the guy was nice enough that worked there. He just let me sit on the floor for like hours on a Saturday afternoon, pouring through Pro Wrestling Illustrated and Inside Wrestling and Wrestling Superstars. And I was reading about all the other territories, and I was learning who all these people were. As a young kid, I just really absorbed it, had a love for it, just was excited to learn all I could. And so I would read all these after magazines. And then several years later, when I was about 16, this would have been 85, 86. I'm downtown at a comic book store, and I hear a couple guys talking about wrestling. And it turned out this was John Hitchcock and Bruce Mitchell. Bruce Mitchell, who wrote for The Torch for many, many years, and
Yep.
John, who did his illustrations. Well, they're talking about wrestling, and they had just discovered this thing called The Observer, this newsletter. And I hadn't been quite following on the after magazines because once the territory started to die out, it was, you know, but then they introduced me in 1986 to the Observer. So I'm 16 years old reading the Observer. I was probably one of the younger ones in the country at the time. And then they invited me, along with some of their other college buddies, to attend the matches in Greensboro. And I'd been to a few. I think my first one was like the Boogeyman Jam when Jimmy Valiant went against the Masked Assassins, Jody Hamilton. And at that time, it was Hercules Ray Hernandez. That was like my first live event. I had seats way up, good seats. And I'd been to a couple others, but the Greensboro guys always got front row somehow. And it's a area called Section D. And
Yep.
so I had been predominantly a Mid Atlantic fan. We'd gotten some cable TV by that point. I was able to get Texas and the Von Erichs, Jimmy Garvin, and we were able to get, of course, TBS out of Atlanta. So we were able to get Ole and then later Jake and Ronnie Garvin and all those great Road Warriors when they debuted. So boy, the timing was really kind of serendipitous. I don't know if I was a huge wrestling fan because I was born in Greensboro and it filled out, or it's just convenient, but it was all kind of there for me, and I just followed it, and I did. I just loved the territories, and I loved the history. I'd read the historic books, and Fall Guys, and whatever happened to Gorgeous George, and these books, and I was just fascinated by the industry to the point. Even when I was an adult, when I first started getting the internet or computers, and we were on the internet, you could pick your own wallpaper, your own background.
Yeah.
I would always
Yep.
find those historic pictures, those black and whites of an arena, and all you could see is the ring with the spotlight over it. And there was just, I still love when I see those pictures. I just think that's the coolest stuff. I mean, I love the high production values that we have now with WWE and some of the other promotions, but there was something about those old historic Smoky, not all the way back to the Carnies, but about 40s and 50s, that golden era of TV. I just really, really enjoyed. And, once we started going to the front row, and man, we had front row for Midnight Express and Rock and Roll. We were front row for the Horsemen and Dusty and Tully and Wahoo and Jimmy and Ronnie Garvin, and it was a great, great time to see the end of Jim Crockett Promotions before it became, before Ted Turner bought him out in '89 or so. And so we went to the front row every month for years. Greensboro was always a hub, always a popular stop, and I just fascinated by it, and I didn't, and there was just in me that I just wanted to be a part of it. I didn't have any aspirations to be a wrestler, manager, or anything like that. It never. But even when you read The Observer, and you kind of know who's coming and who's going and things like that, you don't know really how the business works until you really get backstage and see how everybody interacts and whose role is what. And so I was fascinated by that part too. Like, when they do their localized promos, they're like, wait, now they're in Greensboro, then they're going to Raleigh, then they're going to Charlotte. And you start to realize like this is a traveling circus. Like these guys just drive around the state to beat each other up. It just
Yep.
So yeah, the long answer to your short question. Yeah, just grew up a lifelong fan, got smartened up pretty quick, but still just was fascinated by the intricacies and how it works and the characters and the stories and the promos and all of it. It was just fascinating to me.
So how do you go from being a fan to then actually getting into the business? Like, where do you meet Cornette, and how do you get started in the business? And was Smoky Mountain really your first job in wrestling?
It was. So we had been going long enough, sitting on the front row by that point. Like I said, we were on the front row by '86. So right after Corny came in, I mean, just a few minutes after Jimmy and the original Midnight Express with Dennis and Bobby came in, and then Ricky and Robert. Well, there was no way we were going to cheer for Ricky and Robert. No self-respecting male of 16, 17, or like Hitch and Bruce were in the early 20s. No self-respecting male would cheer for Ricky and Robert.
Right.
So we liked the Horsemen and we liked the Midnight Express. And so we were kind of heel fans, even though we didn't really know we were heel fans at the time. We just liked who we liked. And then if you ever watch the first Clash of Champions, one of my favorite Midnight matches is Midnights versus the Fantastics. But Jimmy gives us a countdown. We're all there. We have our fun little posters. Nobody did posters then. We did posters because John was a great artist. We have posters holding up, spelling out Cornette, whatever that is, 8, 9, 10 letters. Jimmy gives us a countdown. So every time Jimmy would come out, he would kind of acknowledge the front row because we were the only ones that cheered for the bad guys. Because Ricky and Robert were so hot. Everybody was cheering for Ricky and Robert. So he kind of liked us because we were his guys. To the point, well, you do this every month for 3 or 4 years. He knows you, and he'll come by every now and then. And hey guys, how we doing and stuff. So we kind of got familiar enough with him where he would see us, and then eventually, early '90s, he's wanting to leave WCW. He's had his run there. It's no fun. Turner's taken over. They've been phased way down the card, and he's wanting to start his own promotion. By this point, I'm in college up in the mountains in North Carolina, and he has started running Smoky Mountain Wrestling out of Morristown, Tennessee. Now, the TV show aired where I went to school in the mountains, but it didn't go all the way east to Greensboro. However, Jimmy was still traveling around the area, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky, to TV stations to try and get the show on, visiting with them, having meetings. So John Hitchcock, one of the Greensboro guys, calls me and says, hey, Corny's coming to Greensboro. He knows I have a comic book store. He's thinking about getting some of his comics appraised to help fund this thing. I've invited him to come over and watch Clash of Champions with us tonight. Corny's coming over to the apartment with all the guys to watch this clash tonight. You got to come over. Yeah, okay, all right. So we kind of got to meet him that way. He got familiar enough with us. He knew we were kind of smartened up. We were very respectful to him. We were his big fans. And then so he comes over to watch a clash. Now this is fall of '92, John. So this is if you were watching WCW at the time, not good. I mean, this is like Rick Steiner and Bill Kazmaier versus like El Gigante and Pillman or something. I mean, it's not good.
Hmm.
So I come over, all the front row guys, 8 or 9, 10 of us, and Jim Cornette are watching the Clash at John's apartment. Somehow Corny and I wind up sitting together on this little 2-man love seat. John Hitchcock had just purchased Madonna, famous singer, had released her little, put out her little coffee table book called Sex. Bunch of little nudie photos. I mean, it's what everybody was talking about in the news. So Jimmy, of course, picks it up. We start flipping through it together, and just over the course of this really crappy Clash
Hmm.
that we're not paying attention to, we're looking at this Madonna book, and I'm telling him, hey, I'm up in Boone. I've watched your first couple episodes. I really like what I'm seeing. By the end of the night, he says, well, hey, if you want to come to Johnson City, one of the 2 major towns this weekend, let me know and I'll leave you some tickets. He gives me his phone number. We kind of hit it off, and Jimmy gives me his phone number. So that's how I made the connection there. I let him know that I was in the area and I could come to some shows and I was enjoying what I was seeing. And then so I would go to all the shows I could. And Wade Keller of the Pro Wrestling Torch found out I was going to the shows, and I knew Wade a little bit personally. We'd met a few times. He says, hey, will you write up some results? Will you give me some things? So Wade let me start writing some columns about Smoky Mountain in the Pro Wrestling Torch. And then, of course, when I would go to some of these house shows, I would send in results and things like that. So I think, and then I was also taking photographs. And Bill Apter, because there was no one going to these small town shows, I reached out to Bill Apter and said, hey, I got some nice photos. Would you be interested? And he said, yes. So I wound up writing about it for the Torch and sending pictures into the Apter magazines, which is really full circle stuff from the little kid that used to sit in
Yeah, it's awesome.
the newsstand. It was being in the right place, right time. The wrestling business at that point was so low that even though it was a Jim Cornette territory, those first 6 months to a year, there was not a lot of interest in it, because there wasn't an interest, in wrestling very much anyway. WWE was not good. I don't even know if this was Doink era. This is whatever was going on in '92. It wasn't great, and WCW was not doing well. So they weren't getting any exposure. So Jimmy really appreciated that I was getting word out to the newsletters. I was getting word out to the Apter magazines to help them get some exposure. And the guys appreciated it too. And so the guys would start seeing me at the shows more often. And this is something I don't think is talked about as far as how you get in, but at every show, of course, they have souvenir tables, okay, where
Yep.
the Armstrongs sell their T-shirts, Ricky and Robert sell stuff, Bobby Blaze sells his stuff. Well, we set those up at the back corner of a gym. They got T-shirts and whatever, Tracy's gimmicks. Well, of course, the baby faces only come out during intermission, but their wives and girlfriends are out there the whole show. So I would go up every now and then, and it was Tracy that first recognized me, because even though we were heel fans of Greensboro, we loved the Southern Boys and the Pistols, whatever they were going as. Because Tracy and Steve were just fantastic. They were so good. And it was okay to like them. We just couldn't like Ricky and Robert, but we could love Tracy and Steve. So Tracy recognized me. He's like, you're one of the Greensboro guys. I said, yeah. So he and the souvenir table girls, all the wives and girlfriends, Ricky Morton's wife, Tracy's girlfriends, I had to get over with the souvenir table girls first, because then they would tell the guys, hey, this one's okay. He's not a goof. He's not a mark. He's not a drooling idiot for this. Like, he gets us, and he's nice to us, and he's respectful. So first thing I did was, that helped me was getting to know the souvenir table girls. And then Tracy. And Tracy was the one who took me around and introduced me to everybody. And then in particular, Brian Hildebrand, who I've got my back corner. Brian Hildebrand souvenir shirt from his last show.
Yep.
Brian Hildebrand was our referee in Smoky Mountain. Brian had been on the independents for years, tried to make it as a manager, and he didn't, but he was a great referee. Brian had been me. He wanted to get in so bad. He knew what it was like. And of course, he went through Dominic DeNucci's school, and he helped train Cactus and Shane Douglas. And so Brian also, where I was giving results to Wade at the Torch, Brian was calling them into Meltzer at the Observer. So Brian really appreciated what I was doing as well, trying to get the company some exposure, trying to get people to know that like this is good stuff. Because even though there was plenty of smart fans reading the Observers and the Torch by 92, 93, 94, you couldn't see our TV show unless you actually bought our tapes. You know, there was no streaming, there was no internet, there was none of that. So that's how I kind of got that foot in the door with them. I was fortunate to be in the area going to school, going to college. And because of the way those four states all come together, Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, you know, where I lived in one corner, you could hit shows in all the areas. So I would go to everything. I was just to everything. I was just there. And then I became what Corny later called the last great hanger on. Because he would say, "You remind me of Bob Eaton." Bob Eaton started doing this. He would just come and help set up the ring. And like I would do that. I would set up chairs. I'd get there early and just be there. You know, just I love the even though we were only in high school gyms and armories, they were by no means beautiful arenas or civic centers. There's still something about being in a building when the things are getting set up and the rings coming together
Oh
and
yeah.
you
Yep.
know the chairs are getting put out and there's that buzz, there's excitement. The show's going to kick off in a few hours. So again, it was all very serendipitous. It was just, I mean, it wasn't anything I did. It was just timing, being in the right place at the right time, and then being smart enough to not be a goof, not be overly too big of a fanboy. And so the more I stuck around, you know, of course, Jimmy knew me. He'd see me at the shows and he'd wave, and then you know I would show up early on at the TV tapings because they would do promos, local news promos early in the afternoon. I showed up and I got from being able to sit way over in the far corner to the gym to hearing it to like, oh, now I'm out towards the room and now I'm running the stopwatch and just little things. And Jimmy just would say, give me little errands, especially when they were in buildings where they didn't have, he couldn't get to the baby faces because he was in the heel locker room. And he would grab me and say, hey, take this message over to so and so, or go at least go grab Sandy Scott and tell him I need to see him. Little things like that. And I think Jimmy and I just bonded that one night watching that clash and hit it off really, really well. And I think he saw like he was as a kid. I don't I want this. I just want to be a part of this. I don't care if I'm setting up chairs or what I'm doing. Just let me come to the shows. Let me have fun. Let me be there and see live wrestling and hear the crowd and that's how I got in. It was just right place, right time.
That's awesome. So like when do you get like the paid gig, if you will? Like is that 93 ish, would you
Sure.
say?
So that summer '93. So Jimmy has this great idea, and actually, I'm not sure. Actually, I shouldn't say it was Jimmy. It might have even been Hildebrand's idea. They want to do a fan week because again, they're trying to get exposure. So they had this great idea. We're going to invite newsletter readers, you know, the smart fans from New Jersey, from Florida, California. We're going to invite them to Tennessee for a week. We're going to put them up at this beautiful hotel right outside of Dollywood in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We're going to get a bus. We're going to drive them all around. We're going to go to a TV taping, a couple small house shows, a couple of big shows. Knoxville and Johnson City in Tennessee are two big towns. And in hopes that not only will they enjoy it and be exposed, but then they'll go back and tell all their friends.
Right.
So Jimmy wants to put Brian in charge of this. However, Brian, um, who was our main referee, Brian wasn't making it rich there as a referee. So Brian had a job where he worked the evenings. So he was working at a outlet mall stocking shoes all night at like a Payless or something.
Hmm.
So you know, Brian was pretty much nocturnal. If you ever met Brian Hildebrand, chances are you talked to him from midnight to 7 a.m. because poor guy slept from 7 to, you know, till it was time to leave for the show, 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So Brian says to me, hey, I need help with this. Can you? And I was like, absolutely. And so that started me on the payroll. That by helping with Fan Week, and I was picking up everybody at the airports. And then same thing when we'd have wrestlers come in from out of the territory. You know, if a Terry Funk came in, if the Steiners came in, if Sherry came in, I'd go to the airport to pick them up, take them to their hotel. Dick Murdoch, all those folks that came in for us. So And then Jimmy just started finding odd jobs for me to do initially. I was just putting up local posters. And then that kept morphing into more. Then it was okay, hey, we produce a brochure every month for our TV shows because now we're starting to sell tapes all over. We sell a 1 hour videotape of our TV shows, and they were going all over the country. Well, someone's got to dub them, someone's got to label them, pack them up, take them to the post office. So I started handling that for them. And I had to prepare the brochure, which had to be updated every month because you would write down, okay, episode 51 is this with Tracy versus White Boy. Then episode 52 is this, Candido versus Bobby Blaze. Well, I don't have a word processor. Again, it's pre-internet. There's no copy
Yeah.
and paste.
Yeah.
So every month I'm banging out this merchandise brochure. And then because Jimmy liked the writing I'd done for Wade and stuff, he says, we have a program that every time you come to a live show, you buy it for $1 and it has updates on all the feuds and stuff. Jimmy says, I want you to do that. So now I'm preparing the programs. Then it escalates to, okay, every month or every town rather gets a press kit to promote the show that's coming up. So we're coming to Barberville on August 21st. So about 2 weeks before, I take the poster information to the printer. Jimmy dubs a on an old audio cassette, like a 30-second spot. We're coming to Barberville on August 21st, and the main event's this and this, and rock and roll and this and this. But then I would have to prepare a 2 to 3 paragraph, a little write up for the local newspaper. And again, you're doing this for every town because there's no copy and pasting. I'm doing this on an old typewriter. My last senior year typewriter. So I prepared that, the radio spot, and then the posters, and then I would have to deliver those to the towns because oftentimes UPS and FedEx, again, early 90s in Hayside, Virginia, population 128, they were going up there. So I would have to jump in the car in Morristown, drive up to Kentucky, drop off some town information, zip over to Virginia, drop off some town information. Um, and then when we would do TV tapings, the director would say, I need you to go to the building and walk off, meet with the maintenance guy and the principal and walk off the electric lines. So it started as posters and then it became more and more and more and more because I was the one who was available. I was a 24/7 guy. Like I said, poor Brian had a second job. He was not available. Sandy Scott would answer a phone and book a town. So if the local chamber or the Boys and Girls Club from Erlanger, Kentucky called and wanted a show, Sandy would pick up the phone and get the information. But Sandy didn't leave the house. Sandy wasn't going on the road and driving through 3 states in a day like I was.
Right.
That was on me. And of course, Jimmy couldn't do it because Jimmy's our top heel and he doesn't do that. He doesn't go out in public. And also at that time when I started is right when he showed up on Raw that night. A lot of people have probably seen that night when Bobby Heenan welcomes Jim Cornette on
Yep.
Raw.
Then Heenan's gone. Yep.
Yeah, and which blew all of us away because none of us knew. And I was living with Jimmy Del Rey at the time, the Gigolo.
Yep.
He didn't even smarten me up. But I got a call late that night because I thought when I saw them on, John, I don't mind telling you, I was like, shit, we're closing? Like, this is it? They've gone to New York. We're done? Like, I just started. Del Rey called me and Corny called me later that night and said, hey, we're doing this part-time. This is not going to affect. We're still here, which I was very flattered that they took the time to call me. I really appreciated that. But that's how that started in 93. And then, like I said, over the next year and a half, it just kept escalating, to the point I worked myself into a hole. You prove yourself to be dependable, and then you're the only dependable person there. I remember Brian Lee came up to me one time and said, Corny just said if he had one more like you, he could fire the rest of these idiots. And it was because Jimmy knew he could count on me. Like I would get this done to the point when it ended. A lot's been made about, he didn't deliver these posters. That was 10% of my job at that point. And Jimmy and I had been having talks like, Jimmy, you're burying me. I can't. There's 24 hours in a day and you're giving me 38 hours worth of shit to do. Like I cannot keep up with this because just like I said, all the press packages, the programs, running around delivering. Jimmy's always needing tapes, which is very time consuming because he would need to send them off to Bruce Pritchard or some syndicator or things like that. And I just couldn't keep up, and it just buried me with work. So I proved too dependable, and I worked myself into a can't win situation. And so then you're just like, all right, well, I got a checklist of 20 things to do today. I'll
What's the most
prioritize, and
important? Yep.
yeah, I hope I get 10 or 15 of them done. But we didn't have the money to have anyone to help. We had a couple people in the office, but by then he'd run off Tim Horner, he'd run off Pam Lawson. Like I said, Brian was just, already working a second job. He was not available, so it just became crushing trying to keep up, to the point where eventually I couldn't, and that became part of the reason. Yeah,
When you look at obviously Smoky Mountain, Jim is like the face of it. I mean, he's the boss. He's the guy. But obviously, there's somebody behind the scenes, and that's how you're getting paid, right? The money man, and
right.
that's Rick Rubin, who obviously is a world famous producer, icon in the music industry. I mean, the legendary
Yeah,
Rick Rubin. So, do you know that when you work there? Like, what's the deal with Rick?
I don't. That's a good. I don't remember, John, exactly when I found that out, but I do know that Jimmy was able to keep that a secret for quite a while. I mean, like at least the first 6 months. That was not in the newsletters. 6 months to a year, I bet. And I'm not. I think it probably came out. Let's see, probably about the end of the first year, because Rick Rubin was the one who wanted the mummy, the wrestling mummy,
Hmm,
which was a famous, I don't know, famous, maybe infamous might be the right word, but something they had done in Memphis. One of those goofy things, that goofy Memphis things. But Rick Rubin wanted it, and I think Jimmy didn't want like that on his reputation, his stigma.
right.
And so all of a sudden it kind of came out that, like, why are we doing this? Like, we were kind of legitimate. I mean, we presented our product, as legitimate. We didn't have a whole lot of clown acts. And then this thing comes out. Poor Bob and Dutch got to sell it on commentary, and so I think that's when it came out. So I didn't know initially, when I started with the company, when I started going to the shows. Nobody really knew who the Money Man was. There were theories. There were, oh, is this wrestler, that wrestler, or a couple of them, or this or that. But it was very surprising to find out, of all people, all people. Of course, now you see Rick Rubin. He's at all, he's at a bunch of WWE shows. He's well known as a wrestling fan. But no, at that time it
Oh
was
yeah.
pretty much low key. And then even once it initially got out, it was still kind of, in the office. I bet it was a good year before it made the newsletters and stuff. And
So
then,
how was he, Rick?
I only met him the one time. I do have 2 years of tax returns from Rick Rubin, so that's like probably my coolest souvenir ever. That's one of those. If you ever play like two truths and a lie with your friends, I always like, oh, and I worked for Rick Rubin, and everybody's like, oh, you didn't work for Rick Rubin. I'm like,
Yeah.
I sure did. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
But he only came around once. He came to a weekend, and I believe it was the weekend the Steiners came in. The Steiners came in and worked with Del Rey and Dr. Tom, and I think he wanted to be there for that. And I met him in Barberville, just a real hi, hello, how are you? And I knew some of who he produced. I mean, I knew this was a big deal, but even then, I didn't know his whole catalog of work. Of course, he's still producing some amazing music
Yeah.
and
Oh
amazing
yeah.
artists. But he was quiet. He was polite. We didn't, unfortunately, didn't get to go to like dinner or anything. I got to have dinner with a bunch of the guys, but he was a quick, hi, how are you? Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. I'm living my dream because I get to do this. And if it was 30-second conversation, John, that was probably about it. So, but cool dude. I mean, Rick Rubin, man, come on. Rick
Yeah.
Rubin. I
Legend.
mean, like Rick Rubin. Yeah.
You
So,
mentioned the legendary. Speaking of legend, you mentioned the legendary Tim Horner before.
yes.
What was Tim like? Obviously, him and Jim did not have the greatest relationship at the end.
Yeah, that started off. Oh, it started off okay. As Jimmy tells it, he already had in mind that he was going to do this promotion. He's still working for Atlanta, but he's got in his mind, this is what I'm doing. And I think, and at that time, Tim wasn't being used much. Tim found a guy in Morristown to give him some money to run a show. He says, "Hey, Jimmy, I want to run a show in Morristown. I got some money. I'd like to run a couple shows. Would you like to be on my show?" Jimmy realizes, oh, geez, man, that could be a real stinkeroo and could make what I'm getting ready to do more difficult for me. It's one more person to put a bad taste of wrestling shows in the local promoters, in the local mouths by running a crappy show. So Jim says, all right, hey, Tim, how about this? How about you don't do that? I've already got all this lined up. I've got Rick Rubin backing me, real money, and come. And okay, so Tim and Tim was our lead face really the first year, our first wrestling face, lead wrestling face, probably the first 6 months or so. He worked at Dirty White Boy. They had a good feud. They were good old friends. Um, I personally liked Tim. I knew that Tim was not a big draw, but Tim's matches were okay. I remember seeing his stuff with Brad Armstrong. Lightning Express were great.
Yeah, great team.
If you remember when they kicked Ole out of the Horsemen and Ole had like no friends, and the only one was Tim Horner. The only problem was that didn't elevate Tim in my eyes. If anything, it kind of drug Ole down. So like, I mean, it's like, oh, wow, shit, that's your big backup, is Tim Horner. Huh. But he's a good worker and he's okay. He just, he's a little dry, and some of those guys are. Not everybody is a Jim Cornette or a Bob Armstrong. Not everybody has that, that fire and that way to connect with the crowd. But Tim was a good guy, and I'm not. I mean, I kind of understand how it fell apart, because I think Tim wanted more, and Jimmy's like, well, shit, we tried. You're not a draw. Nobody comes to see you. Like, I can't keep pushing you forever. And I think Tim's had the famous line that if this were a movie or a wedding, you'd be the best man and not the groom. And that really was. That was kind of Tim's lot. But I think I had the theory, and I won't be in Knoxville anytime soon, so Allison can't get me. But he had a pretty wife that could be. Whatever the word is that I don't want to get in trouble for saying, but I think she was kind of in Tim's ear and kind of saying, you should be in a bigger spot. And I think if she had not been, I think Tim would have taken whatever Jim said and just taken his paycheck and gone home.
Yep.
But I think Allison, and again, she was a nice enough lady, but I think she's one of those who, Tammy Wynette, stand by your man. And I don't think her husband was quite the star that she thought he was. And then, there's this whole, because Tim was responsible for running the merchandise. And so because Tim allowed me to dub the tapes, Tim was paying me separate from what Jimmy was paying me. So I was making money with Tim. So Tim's over with me. Like, he's good.
Right,
like, I'm making
right.
money.
Yep.
But where they had their falling out, I just thought Tim was a nice guy. I didn't have anything bad to say about him. And his two trainees, he had two trainees there that we were all real good friends. We were all young, 20-year-old guys, good friends and stuff. They thought the world of him. I just think Jim and Tim had different ideas of what Tim should be in the company. And I think Jimmy, being a little more domineering, bombastic personality, didn't appreciate some of the things Tim was trying to do. And I think Tim just wanted to be a bigger star, but it just wasn't in the cards for him. It just wasn't. So.
When you look at, like, obviously you said he quit, Pam Lawson quit, but what was the deal with Sandy Scott? I know, obviously, I guess he's the booker, or Cornette's the booker. I mean, what's Sandy Scott's role?
Sure. So Sandy Scott, of course, for people who may not know, Sandy Scott had been a famous wrestler in the 50s and 60s, along with his brother George. They'd been a famous tag team out of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. The Flying Scots. So legendary baby faces around the Mid-Atlantic area, up in Canada, and then they came to Mid-Atlantic. His brother George Scott was actually the booker who booked Flair and Steamboat, who really kicked off Mid-Atlantic. He also was one of the earliest bookers for Vince when WWE took off, WWF at that time, with Hulk Hogan and Piper. He was kind of the connection that got all the Mid-Atlantic guys up to New York. So George Scott was the booker. Sandy did not book. He was the promoter. So he had been the money man in the ending days of Crockett. And what I mean by that is, if you go to a house show, you would see Sandy Scott go up to the box office, and he would sit down with the box office manager of that building, of the Greensboro Coliseum. They would count out all the ticket sales. Sandy pays out the rent. Sandy pays out whatever percentage the building has agreed to take, the concessionaires, yada, yada, yada. Then Sandy takes the rest of the money in his Halliburton, handcuffed to him, because Sandy was also an old shooter. So you weren't going to jump Sandy Scott and grab his briefcase with 15 grand in it and haul ass to the parking lot and go, because Sandy'd hook you and stretch it. So that's what Sandy did after he retired for Jim Crockett. He was the money man or the box office man, they call it. Now, when Corny starts Smoky Mountain, like I said, he's brought Tim in so Tim doesn't screw up the local wrestling scene with the crappy shows. He's
Right.
brought Tim in to do merchandise, and he calls Sandy because Sandy is also not enjoying the early days of Ted Turner and Jim Herd promotion in the early '90s. So he says, Sandy, I'd like you to be my promoter. What that means is uh, the Hyden, Kentucky Boys and Girls Club would like to have a wrestling show come to their town. In exchange, they'll promote it. We'll provide the promotional materials, the posters I did, the newspaper clippings, the radio spots that we were doing for them. We'll provide the advertising, and then you'll get a cut of the ticket sales. So Sandy, like he done for Crockett, he'd answer the phone. Hi, John. Yeah. Oh, you're in Hyden, Kentucky, and you want to run a show on August 21st. Okay. Here's what we'll do. We'll come in. We'll provide you this. I'll be there that night to do the count with you at the box office. I'll pay you off, pay you your proceeds, and I'll take the rest. And so that's what Sandy did. Sandy was technically the town promoter. He booked the towns. Jimmy booked the talent and wrote the storylines and the TVs. And Sandy was the one who got us into the towns. And then at the shows, after he did the box office count, and again, he's got that Halliburton with several $1,000s in it, he would come into the locker room and ask the boys if they needed a draw. Jimmy paid the boys weekly. Pretty sure it was weekly. It might have been bi-weekly. But Sandy comes in and says, hey, we're on the road for 2 more nights. Does anybody need a draw? In other words, a cash advance against your paycheck.
Right.
So Sandy had the cash, and oh, John, you need $100 to get back to Morristown. You gas in a hotel. All right, and so Sandy was responsible for that and made sure that Jimmy knew, hey, John got $100 off his check this week, $100 advance, because they always offer that to the boys. Do you want to draw? And that was Sandy's job in the promotion.
So when you look at Smoky Mountain, it's like, okay, you got a bunch of legends. Obviously, you got Cornette and the Heavenly Bodies, as far as just some great, like, quote unquote, current guy or more current guys. Cornette, obviously, legend from Crockett days too. But it seems like there's a good mix of talent. Sometimes they get WWF guys coming in, sometimes the Steiner brothers show up, this
Yeah.
and that, and I mean the Funk and Bullet Bob and all these other great guys. So would you say it was a success? Like, was it making money? Like, how was it? Just bottom dollar financially, how was Smoky Mountain?
I think uh, I think he was making money. Jimmy used to say, because Jimmy's corny, I'm talking about, is so he was very responsible and obligated to Rick Rubin. So it's almost like a car payment. He's bought this car, but he's got to keep paying on it every month. So he's making monthly payments to Rick because he doesn't want to get himself in a hole for 20, 30, 50, $100,000. So it's hard to say, but I know there were several shows, especially our big shows in Knoxville, that made money. So yes, I think the first 2 years, maybe in the first three, it was financially solvent. I mean, it was okay because he was able to pay everybody, all the wrestlers. He only had the one referee in Hildebrand. His office staff was me, and then the ring crew, um, and himself. And Jimmy never ever, I'm sure, never paid himself. I'm sure Jimmy never took a dime out of it. I think once he went to New York and they started paying him, I think he just lived with that. But I do believe it was making a profit. I do believe it was. It may not have been a very big profit.
Right.
I mean, but if you're going into Knoxville and you're drawing 4,000 people and you're selling $10 tickets, so yeah, I think it did. I think because he was also very, very smart about not overloading the guys coming in from the outside. And if he did, he made sure it was like an annual big show. It was Fire on the Mountain in June. It was Christmas Chaos. But he didn't just for no reason bring in a Undertaker, a Shawn Michaels, or a Dick Murdoch or Terry Funk. And he certainly didn't bring in usually more than one or two legends at a time. Unless it was that big show, like a Night of the Legends or something like that. But I thought Jimmy balanced it really, really well. Jimmy was smart, man. He was not. There's so many guys that try to do this stuff and they just don't. They don't have the wrestling knowledge, the business acumen, and there were just a lot of things that Jimmy just understood how to do it. He paid attention to Jeff Jarrett or Jerry Jarrett. He paid attention to Bill Watts. He paid attention to Can Mantell and Fritz. He paid attention to Dusty. He's a savant. I mean, if you still listen to his podcast, I mean, the stuff that he can off the top of his head, it's absurd. So I do believe that it was making money. Some days more than others, and some days not much. But it was enough that I think the good days outweighed the bad days.
So what had it going more downhill? Was it because he was pulled away from WWF, by WWF so much? I mean, became Yokozuna's manager. Obviously, the Heavenly Bodies are going in and out.
Right.
Was that the whole thing? Was he just pulled away too much, or was it that Smoky Mountain's one of the last real territories, and it was just territory wrestling, just really kaputs at that point?
I think it was a combination, James. Or John, it's never one thing you can point your finger at. It's never one thing. It was a combination of yes, on one let's when WWE came calling, and people, well, why did he do that? That was a can't win position for him because he's got to get some of his guys up there. He owes that to them for helping him. So,
Right. Yep.
but then they're also giving him exposure. The problem is this guy's already getting run ragged running his own promotion is a ton of work. A ton of work. I can't tell you how many times I would get phone calls at 2 or 3 in the morning from him. Hey, I need this and this and this and this because he knew I was up. I'm over here working at my house. So he already had all this work on him from Smoky Mountain. And then, yes, WWE comes in. And combine that with, if you recall where the state of the industry was in 93 and 94. Okay, we're talking PN News and Stone Cold on the scaffold. We're talking Doink the Clown and Crush.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they've ever done, well, of course, maybe now they have, but at that time, the numbers were brutal. Ratings were horrible. House show attendance was horrible. Bill Watts was running people off in droves. If you recall, at that time, WCW literally stopped running house shows because they were losing so much money. If you read The Observer and look for WCW house show results in, say, October of 93, they were running like the Crystal Chandelier, a bar in Kennesaw, Georgia. That was it. So they were not doing well. Vince is getting hauled off to court. He's got, steroid trials and all this other stuff. So he's not doing well. So that you've got a combination of the nature of the business not doing well. The overall health of the industry is very, very poor. Jim is getting pulled in way too many directions, but he can't say no to New York. Because guess what? If they want his guys and he says no, they're going to come take him anyway. Or heaven forbid, Brian Lee found out that they wanted him for the Undertaker and Jimmy said no. Brian would have killed Jimmy.
Right.
You screwed up my shot. So he's got to start a working relationship with him. He's just got. Unfortunately, he got on their radar too soon. Just too soon, And so the nature of the business, it was just, and then for us, and I've tried to tell people this before, to me, things started going downhill in the spring of 94. We had this great Bluegrass Brawl in April. This tremendous show with Ricky and Robert versus Dr. Tom and Gigolo Jimmy Del Rey in a cage. Losing team leaves the territory. And if you've ever seen the finish, it's one of those where you just see the whole crowd erupt. It's amazing. We're in a college gym, about 2,000 people, and you'd swear it's like Madison Square Garden. Well, the problem was after that, okay, now our top heel act is left. And there was no one, literally no one to replace the people we were starting to lose because he'd spent the whole year before building up his baby faces, building up his heels to that crescendo, right? All right, so then we have our big blow off. Well, now you've got to start over because not everybody is a Ricky Morton or a Bullet Bob that can come out to the same town every week for 20 years and get a pop. A lot of these guys have to go away. Well, you look at the overall state of the industry. You have to look at, okay, who can we bring in? Who's not overexposed? Who can we afford? Who's in the area that will work Erlanger, Kentucky, at the high school gym in front of 250 bucks on a Friday night. Who's available? There was nobody because again, WCW, what they had decided to do is we're not going to run shows anymore, but we're going to sign everybody to contracts so they don't leave and go to Vince. So Atlanta is paying guys that Jimmy would have loved to have had to stay home. WWE has got their guys locked up because we don't know what's going on with this trial and we may lose the company, we may not. So you're stuck with some of those fringe legends and who, like I said, again, who will come in and who we can afford. And it was like Tony Atlas and Jake Roberts. I mean, you look at the landscape. There was who's over that will make a difference. Who can we afford? Who will draw a crowd? There was just nobody to replace these guys. So he found Bruiser Bedlam, who had been Johnny K9, an
Yes.
enhancement guy in New York for
Yeah.
years. You know, he found him on a Detroit independent show that he and the Bodies happened to do and brought him in. But nobody in Tennessee knew who Bruiser Bedlam was, or even Johnny K9. He'd been off TV for years. So we brought in the Gangstas. Okay, well, nobody knows who New Jack is. We all would soon.
Yeah.
but
A little controversial. Yeah.
right, you know, but in '94, nobody knew who Mustafa and New Jack were. You know, we were
Thrill
stuck with Well
Seekers. Yep.
Done. And I love Steve and Rex, the Southern Rockers, whatever you want to call them. Great guys. Not the best workers in the world, but I mean, the good guys to have in your locker room. But they had the stigma of we went to New York for 6 weeks of TV and we were so awful they kicked us back down to the minors. So they weren't moving the needle. Then you bring in Jericho and Storm, who are super duper green. Of course, they would go on to become superstars, but so we just had nobody to bring in, and that just started this awful decline, nosedive in '94. Now, Jimmy was going to write him good TV, and he was going to build him. But the problem is when you have that many green guys and you don't have established talent or veterans to put them over, because we'd lost Kevin Sullivan and gone up to ECW by then. Ronnie Garvin had left. Paul Orndorff had been with us, but he got signed with WCW. We just didn't have anyone except for Ricky and Robert to establish new talent. And Ricky and Robert can only put over so many new guys before then they start to lose their luster
Right.
and their appeal, and they start to look bad. And then you've got the Mummy, and you know it just so it just became this combination of multiple factors of yes, Jimmy overworked, nature, state of the industry overall. People didn't care about wrestling. I think the Mummy didn't do us any favors, you know. And I loved Rob Mazy, the guy who played him. He's another great guy, but that doesn't do you any good. People looking at that and they're like, even in the backwoods of Kentucky and Tennessee, where they believe this stuff 100%, they know that's horse shit. They know that's like, so. That's really what started, you know, from the high point, and I think it kind of leveled out over the winter of '94 into '95. But by the end of '95, when they had Wolfman and Jimmy was doing some other horrible stuff,
Yeah.
just couldn't. There was just nobody to come in. That was the issue. One of the of the three things in my mind that really put it in the downward spiral.
So with you, obviously, you had a bit of a falling out with Cornette as well. Was this because of the video camera? Was there? He thought maybe you took the video camera. Is that the issue?
So here's I'm glad you asked. Thank you, because I here's the issue: how the video camera. He did a podcast on me a couple years ago, and Jimmy and I have reconnected over the years. We didn't for a long time. He likes to say that, oh, I gave Casey this video camera, as if I just, oh, he's just playing around with this video camera. Am I getting dark in here, James? Do I need to turn on a light? I'm realizing I'm losing the light.
You're a little bit dark. Sorry, you're not bad though.
You want to turn on a light real quick? Can you edit?
Sure. Yeah. There you go. Much better. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's only 7:50 here, so the sun's going down. Sorry. Okay, so about the camera. So actually, what happened with the camera was, and I think Jimmy just forgot about this because it's been years. Jimmy didn't just give me this video camera to go play with, like I don't know what he thinks I was doing with it, but what happened was early in '94, Jimmy is trying to keep the Rock and Roll Feud and the Heavenly Bodies. He's trying to add the next layer to it, trying to keep the story going. And he's decided what we're going to do is he's going to start freshen up the angle by having them in marathon matches. Go an hour, most falls, and the hour wins. Okay. So Jimmy comes to me, calls me one night, come over to the house. He says, okay, this Friday I can't be in Hyden, Kentucky, wherever it is. He says, I want you to take this video camera, get up in the stands, set it up like a hard cam at the TV shoot. Okay. He said, the main event is going to be Rock and Roll and Bodies. They're going to go an hour. I want you to film the last 20 minutes. And then afterwards, I want you to go down to the locker room and get an interview, get two 60-second promos with Ricky saying, boy, we had you. And your tongues were dragging and you can't hang with us. And, we're going to challenge you to a series of marathon matches, most falls in the hour. He said, get two promos with Ricky. If Ricky's okay with them, show them to Ricky. If Ricky likes them, good enough. And we're going to use that on TV. And that's going to start the angle. So I film this. They go to an hour draw, get that. So that was the first thing I did with the camera. And then about a week or two later, we're getting ready to go into February. We have a big show called Sunday Bloody Sunday. This is one of my favorite Ron Wright stories. So Jimmy says, hey, I need you to go up to Kingsport, Tennessee, about an hour or two north of Morristown. And I need you to go shoot interviews with Ron Wright. Take the video camera, meet Ron, call Ron, see where he wants you to meet him at his house, wherever, and get 2 or 3 30 or 60-second promos. Okay. So I call Ron Wright. Now, Ron Wright is, of course, a legend in the area. He's the number one hillbilly, right? And so he's got that thick as molasses Southern drawl. People say I have an accent, but Ron Wright was thick. So I call Ron. I said, Ron, it's KC. Jimmy wants me to come up and do a couple interviews with you for the Sunday Bloody Sunday. Dirty White Boy is going to face Brian Lee in a Tennessee chain match. They just like an old bull rope match, but we use the Tennessee chain instead. All right, well, meet me at Shoney's. Okay. Shoney's, the restaurant, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I go to Kingsport, Tennessee to meet Ron Wright, the number one hillbilly at the Shoney's restaurant. Nice little family restaurant. Well, we go in and they don't have a private room, but the manager says, well, you can have this little area and I'll pull across this little fake like partition, like a little portable wall.
Yep.
That's no thicker than, a notebook, a magazine. Okay. So I get Ron, I'm framing him up and I'm okay. All right. I got him all set. Okay. We're going to do a 60-second promo or 30-second promo for Sunday Bloody Sunday, Dirty White Boy Tony Anthony, Brian Lee in a Tennessee chain match. Now the restaurant on the other side of this partition is full. It's like 2 p.m. There's plenty of people in there, right?
Right.
So all of a sudden Ron goes from 0 to 60 in like this. And he starts. My dirty white boy's going to blast that son of a gun in the eye. Here's going to be blood running down the halls. We're going to bust open his nose. We're going to knock out his teeth. There's going to be blood running down the halls of that stuff. And he just starts going. And all of a sudden, you hear, like it's perfect like a comedy. You just hear like water glasses spilling, forks getting dropped on plates as he's just talking about how bloody it's going to be. And he's going to knock out his teeth and knock out his eye and bust his head open. And it was hilarious just hearing. You can actually hear it if you ever watch the tape. Because we couldn't edit that part out. I had to use the interview so you could hear dishes clattering, and people are just like, "What what is this?" So that was another thing I had to use the tape for. So God bless Ron Wright. I know we've lost him. He was amazing to work with someone like him, and I didn't get to see him in his prime by any means. But again, I'm a history guy. I like the older stuff, and so I know the stuff he did, and I would see the old press clippings, and Ron Wright was tremendous. So next thing, so I use that for the camera and I take that back and we air that on the shows. And those are the promos for the shows. Then Corny says, hey, take the video camera. Cause I did a bunch of stuff and I think he just forgot that I produced these segments. He says, I need you to go down to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Terry Gordy is coming in and I need you to go to Terry's house and get a couple of promos with him. And I'm like, oh, Terry Gordy. Like, man, I got Georgia Championship Wrestling in 1981 on cable. I saw him drop Ted DiBiase on his head in the studio. Like I saw him and Kerry and Kevin and David Von Erich at in the Coppa. Like I've seen him working in All Japan. Like I probably that was the one I marked out for the most. I mean, I'm biting my tongue. I'm trying to play cool, John, but I'm just like, right. Oh my God, it's Terry Gordy.
Nice.
Yep. So unfortunately, this was probably 8 months after he had his incident, his overdose, whatever happened to him on the plane to Japan. So I drive up this mountain, and I come up to this big, beautiful mountain cabin. I walk in, knock on the door, and he lets me in. And it was like talking, like I have kids. It was like talking to it was like talking to your 8-year-old son's friend. Like, you know how you got kids?
Oh yeah, 8 years
All right.
old.
So you
Yeah.
know how when you talk to their friends and they're like, they know you're an adult, but you're not their dad. They're very nervous and timid.
Yes. Awkward
That,
conversation. Yeah. Yep.
yeah, that was what it was like talking to Terry. Like he'd had that overdose or stroke or whatever happened. This was not, this wasn't the bully of Bad Street, man. This
Right.
was, and so it's agonizing. And I'm trying to pull these promos out of him and I'm coaching him. Like, Terry, you can say this and remind people that I drew, I was 40,000 people in the Cotton Bowl, and I've wrestled the Triple Crown in Japan, and it wasn't there. It just so I think we might have used those promos in the show because it was all we had, but that was probably one of the more disheartening moments. Like I had 100 million high moments there. I drove down that mountain just thinking, like, ooh, hey, God, this business just, whew, like, man, don't do drugs, man.
Yeah.
So and then the last thing, the last one that I can remember, now we've got Jericho and Lance Storm have come in. And if you've ever seen some of the cheesy videos we made for them, and they're cheesy,
Oh,
let me tell you,
awful.
because,
Yeah, they're
oh,
awful.
yeah, the ride around the go kart and the ice skating. And so we do all this stuff down around Dollywood and Gatlinburg, which is just a huge amusement park of a town. Well, then the next one we want to do is Jimmy wants to, and Jimmy was able to do those himself. I was there dragging cord and stuff, but nobody knew who the Thrill Seekers were. So Corny could direct all those segments, the first ones we did at Gatlinburg and in Dollywood, just showing them, feeding them bears and stuff that goofy, playing in the video arcades. The
Yep.
next ones he wants to do are Storm and Jericho in downtown Knoxville talking to girls. And it starts in a hotel room with some girls. And well, Corny says, hey, I can't. They've been on TV now. I need you to take the camera, go downtown with them, hit the bar scene. Now, Knoxville is a college town. University of Tennessee is a college
Right.
town.
Yep.
So, okay, so he's like, I need you to go down, take him to a couple bars, video him talking to girls and doing fun stuff at the bars. Okay, so this is, again, I'm producing these. Okay. Problem was, Lance was married, and Lance Storm, great guy. Don't have a bad thing to them. He's awesome. But Lance Storm had zero interest. I mean, his wife is here. She came down from Canada with him, so she's at home in the apartment. He has zero interest in even pretending, for the sake of a TV angle or a little TV bio, like no interest in talking to girls. He's just like, nope, nope, nope. Which leaves it up to Jericho.
Right.
Jericho is a natural ham. He chews up scenery. He's just like a little Roddy Piper. Jericho had no game at that point. I understand he's married a lovely lady now and he's
Yeah.
got kids, and God bless him, good for him. Trying to get him to go up and like, hey, there's a couple cute chicks over there. Like, so he was just, I don't know, man. I don't know, man. I'm like, you guys are supposed to be our hot young studs, our next fabs, and there's nothing fabulous about you. You're too boring ass. Like, yes, you can do
Yeah.
fun little Japanese high spots, but you don't even talk to the girls. So myself, I have to go over and be like, hi, excuse me, ladies. My buddies and I are just doing a little TV show. We couldn't even say blogs or this way before this. Like, we're just doing some fun little skits for a show. Would you mind? Could we come over and just pretend like you're interested? Could you just pretend like you're interested
Yeah.
in these two guys?
Yep.
Okay. So I have to do this for them all right. And then I came up with the idea like, Chris, why don't you be extra cheesy? And hey, miss, would you mind just slapping him like he's being fresh at the bar? And so those are the videos that, I did for them as well. And that's why I had this camera for months, because every time someone would need to come in, and Jimmy, as the lead heel in the company in kayfabe, he would not go out in public with his new young hot babyface tag team. He wasn't, no offense to Terry Gordy, but he wasn't going to drive 3 hours to Chattanooga to talk to someone he already knew wasn't all there. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew he'd about this incident. And so that's why I had this camera forever. To me, It was company property, like these days you start
Yeah.
a job, they give you a laptop, cell phone, hell, you might even get a car. So to me, it was always company equipment. It was just part of. And so that's why I had the camera all those months. And then there might have been a couple other little segments, some Bruiser Bedlam stuff or something that came up that I would do little shoots for. But that's where my job had escalated too. Like I said, I'd started delivering posters, and by the end, like I mean, these days they call you producer. I was just holding the camera, but whatever. I won't dress it up. But I mean, I'm doing these segments for our TV show towards the end, and that's why I have the camera.
Was not stolen though. Was not stolen.
No, I did not steal the camera. People like, oh, he stole Cornette's camera. And here's the thing and I've never been able to explain this about the money, or at least not when Jimmy and I had our blow up. Because again, I've got 20 things to do. I've told him I'm overworked. He knows it. He's tried to take some off my plate, but there's nobody to help. And so I'm just prioritizing. Like, well, I'll just do what I can. And it wasn't enough. And Sandy was getting mad because the towns were not drawing and because they didn't get their posters. It has nothing to do with the fact that we produced a shit show or shouldn't have been in this tiny town. Blame the
Right.
poster kid, but okay, whatever. But what happened with the money was Jimmy didn't want to pay me my salary for the last 2 weeks, which I accepted. The money that I was always like, I want my money. People go, oh, well, my money. Yeah, I wanted my money. I had put in my own money for expenses. This is
Right.
August, dating back to the previous Thanksgiving Thunder. So, like when the Thrill Seekers put Corny's face through a birthday cake, I went to the store and paid for that birthday cake. When the Thrill Seeker or whoever it was, rock and roll dumped pig manure on Tammy Fitch, I'm the one that went to the store and bought all that pig manure. I would always go to the store and buy all this stuff, props for TV. If someone got tarred and feathered, I bought the pillow, the corn syrup, and all that, with the idea that I was going to be paid back. And Corny said, "Go get that, and I'll pay you back." And I had these receipts, like, dude, like you owe me $300 for this stuff. So that to me, if you don't want to pay me for not doing my job, fine. But to me, that the money that you owe that I invested in the company, not invested, but that I paid for, that you said
Yep.
you would pay me back, to me was a separate issue. And I wasn't going to let that go. I understand if you feel like I didn't do my job, although I did the best I could. You don't want to pay me. That doesn't fly in the real world. But these days, I mean, if your boss says, "Hey, we're gonna have a company picnic tomorrow. Go spend $300 on sandwiches, and I'll pay you back," and then they fire you, and they don't they still owe you that 300? That's kind of how I felt. Like you
Yeah.
still owe me that. Is how I felt. And so when he calls me up, and he's like, "Do you have a camera?" Yeah, it's sitting here. I need it. And I'm like, "Well, you're not gonna pay me my salary?" Nope. Well, how about the money you owe me? No, I'm not gonna pay you that either. And that was just like, you know what, man? I've given you 2 years. And something else people don't realize. When I started working for Jimmy, and if anybody was watching wrestling in 92, the legend of Cornette then was not of this bombastic, there was no Dairy Queen video in 1992. If you knew
Right.
Jim Cornette in 92, he was this awesome young manager. He always had this great tag team. They always had like the best matches on the show. Like he was a promising young booker. He'd been on the booking committee in Atlanta. Nobody knew that he was this bombastic, just like would blow up all the time. So when I started there, that's what I thought. I'm working for this funny guy, this promising booker, this guy who has great tag teams, always books great matches, and like, but over time he starts blowing up because the stress of trying to run your promotion and trying to serve this master in New York got to him. He's having these blow ups. That's not fun, man. Like nobody wants to go to work and deal with that day after day after day after day. At least I didn't. I kind of grew up with some bombastic parents, and it was kind of a deal breaker for me. Like, if I ever get out, I remember as a kid, as a teenager, like, if I ever get out of this house, I'm not having this in my personal life. So, the fact that really my only job in wrestling, first job in wrestling, I walked into what became someone who was very bombastic like that and just erupted, that the job was not fun. The business was going down. The money was hard to get. I was always fighting to get paid. I've got a boss who's a lunatic. It was just like, you know what, man? I'm 24/7 for you. I've done all I can. I've begged you to get some help. You won't hire anybody because you can't afford to. I'm drowning because you're overextended. So now I'm overextended on work. I can't keep up. And if you're not going to pay me my salary, at least give me the money that you owe me, the company owes me that I paid for, so I can get the fuck out of Tennessee. So I can go back to North Carolina, or I go out to Wyoming where I want to go see Yellowstone and check it out. And that was really why I dug my heels in. And I talked to Robert Gibson, because Robert had really taken me under his wing. He was kind of, he was just a good guy. And I was just like, what do I do? Like, he won't give me the money he owes me. And I don't know if it was good advice from Robert or bad, but he was the one who said, try and work out a trade for that camera. If he still has that, and of course, in hindsight, it wasn't such great advice, but I don't think Robert was, I know Robert wasn't trying to set me up. I mean, I'd been in his home several times, took care of his kids, and Robert was very good to me. So it just didn't work. Uh,
Did
I
you
called
trade the
Jimmy's.
money for the camera? Is that what happened?
So no, so Corny comes over to get the camera, and he takes the baseball back to my car, knocks all the windows and stuff out, and so at that point it becomes a legal issue, and I just step back. And again, like I said, my mom had worked for a law firm, so I just said, "Hey, can you get one of your lawyer friends to deal with this? I don't want to have shit to do with this. I'm going." And Jimmy got an attorney, and I got an attorney, and so the damages to my car were about $2,000. He owed me 300 for a receipt, for things that I'd bought for the company for TV and stuff. And I'd gone out to Wyoming and I landed a job at a ranch, but I couldn't stay. So I was like, you know what? And I don't mind saying, I put the screws to him a little. I was like, there's lost income. So I said, you owe me 2,300, round that up to $3,000. And I'll bring the camera to your lawyer's office and we'll sign off everything. So it took a month or two of the lawyers doing their lawyers talk. But the funny thing is we go, and I didn't even know Jimmy was going to be there. I go to this attorney's office in Morristown. I think I'm there to pick up a check. I've got the camera in my trunk, and Corny's sitting in the lobby. I'm like, oh shit, we haven't seen each other in 2 months, and it didn't end well. And so we're just kind of sitting there across from each other in this little law firm waiting area, and his attorney comes out. Gentlemen, I'll be right here. I'll be with you too in just a sec. Try not to. And he was kind of a cornball. He's like, try not to have a big brawl and tear up my waiting room, guys, huh? And he turned around and walked off. And I just kind of looked at Jimmy, and Jimmy looked at me. And at the same time, we both looked at each other and we're just like, fucking jack off. Because we still had that. And we both kind of cracked each other up. It broke the ice. He gave me the check. I gave him the camera. He said, what are you going to do now? I said, I'm right back to Wyoming. I got everything I own in the back of my car, and I'm heading right back. Okay. And so I went back out to Wyoming for a while. I had to come home for a little bit to get stuff. And I wanted to tell you this Undertaker story. So,
oh yeah, got to get that one in.
Yeah. So this is what did it for me. So I'm on my way out to Wyoming. I'm stopping in Omaha, Nebraska, because Dr. Tom and they're at a WWE house show. And the A team is in Madison Square Garden that night, and the B team is in Omaha. So Brian Lee's there and Dr. Tom, and it's my last time to see Brian Lee. So I go see him at the show. He gets me in. I get tickets and all that. Afterwards, we go to this bar, and it's a nudie bar, of course. And nice. We're sitting there having our drinks and stuff. And way over there in the back corner in the dark sits the Undertaker. Now this is when Brian is doing the Underfaker thing, that SummerSlam.
Yep.
So they can't, even though they're buddies, they can't. So I see him way over there, and Undertaker's got a couple people with him. Brian and over here with the girls, we're having fun. About halfway through the night, I get up and I run to the can. I was standing at the urinal doing my thing, and in walks the Undertaker. And he had seen me with Brian, and he steps to the urinal next to me. It's so awkward, so weird, but this is how it happened. Well, we're both standing at the urinal, and I'm, as a monster. He looks down at me and goes, "You that kid that got his car busted up?" Yes, sir. Yeah, lucky me. And he looked at me and goes, "Get out of this business, kid. They'll rape you." And I was like, "Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm doing." And I went out, had a few more drinks with Brian, and hugged him and Dr. Tom. And last time I saw either of them, I kept on going from Omaha right to there. But yeah, when the Undertaker, one of the biggest stars in the business, "Get out of this business, kid. They'll rape you." And I was just like, "Yes, sir. I think that's exactly what I'm going to do." So that's
great advice.
Yep. That was it, man. I was just like, all right, I'm out of here. See ya. And I said, then I came to Wyoming and fell in love here with it. And I have since I've always had in the back of my mind, John, to write a book. I never. I've got all the details. I kept a journal the whole time I was in Smoky Mountain. I kept notes and stuff. Um, I've got the first 5 chapters done. I've got an outline. I think I've shared some of that with you. And,
Yep.
so I'm trying to find the. So it's not just a boring. I was a wrestling fan. I went to college. I did this. I'm trying to find like a.
Hook.
Yes, sir. Some little theme, common thread through the whole thing. I was a
Right.
teenage wrestling fan or whatever it was. So, and I also sat on it for a long time because Jimmy and I did not speak for years. And as weird as it sounds, I kind of felt like I still needed his not permission, but blessing or something. I just wanted his okay. Like, hey, man, I want to write this book about my time in the wrestling business because it's a unique story. Would you not contribute, but would you mind? And he told me a few years ago, he's like, yeah, do whatever you want. So he's like, I'll probably beat you to the punch. I'm like, all right, well, and here it is about 3 years later, and neither one of us have got it published. But I don't know if he's working on his. I know I have mine, and I'm just trying to, I said, just trying to make it into a story that's not just A, B, C, and D. But
Yep.
we'll get there. We'll get there. So,
As we hit the wind down, we'll head towards the finish. Obviously, there's plenty more stories, maybe in a book or maybe in part two with me. Hopefully, a little bit down the line. But obviously, that book would be awesome. But
yeah.
just in your mind, like best Smoky Mountain matches, or if maybe a fan's like, I gotta check it out, I need to know more. What are like the best matches to watch from Smoky Mountain?
So my personal favorites have always been anything with Chris Candido and Bobby Blaze because they were so unique to the product. The product had a very southern bent to it. It had a Memphis flavor, because so many of the guys had come, or a continental flavor, because everybody had either been in Florida in continental or gone through Memphis. Chris and Bobby had not. So that was the style I liked. Bobby had been trained by the Malenkos. He had a really great style. Chris was just I never met anybody who loved the wrestling business more than Chris Candido. He would do
Hmm.
anything for a laugh. He would do anything for a match. Um, he actually the power bomb off the top rope that he wound up using as his finisher all the way through ECW and stuff for many years.
Yep.
He saw that with me. We sat down. There was a popular women's All Japan women, all the women promotions in Japan did a show in I think '92 called All Star Dream Slam. And he saw like Kyoko Inoue or Manami Toyota, one of them do a power bomb off the top rope. He took that and started giving that to Bobby Blaze every night, bouncing poor Bobby's head off the mat like a basketball. I felt like I owed Bobby an apology for showing Chris those matches.
Yeah, right.
People should watch those for sure if you like, because those were probably current day or at least the late '90s, early 2000s, like that early Ring of Honor style before early Ring of Honor. They were just doing different Southern stuff. If you like classic tag teams, I mean, I thought the matches with the Rock and Roll and the Bodies with Jimmy Del Rey were a little better than Stan as the one of the Bodies because Stan was doing enough, but Jimmy Del Rey had something to prove. This was his first shot,
Yep.
so Jimmy would bump all over. So any matches with the Heavenly Bodies, particularly the Jimmy Del Rey and Dr. Tom. So the second set from '93 to '94, any of those rock and roll. If you like classic tag teams, because they just know how to build things. They just really, how to escalate, how to work the ref, work the blind tag. They just, they're just masters. And of course, Ricky Morton, the greatest baby face. It's either Ricky Morton or Ricky Steamboat in my lifetime, are the two greatest baby faces I ever saw. So any of those matches are fantastic. Um, for spectacles, anytime Jimmy Cornette and Bullet Bob got in the ring, these are not Dory Funk, Jack Briscoe classics by any means. No, sir. But because Jimmy just kept pushed on heat and heat and heat, there's a I think it was a Fire on the Mountain in Knoxville. They had a cage match where they handcuffed Bob to the cage. He's literally crucified. And Cornette's just wailing on him with this tennis racket about 10 or 12 times, sends poor Bullet Bob to the hospital. Those are spectacles where Jimmy just built as far as how he booked the match. Those are something special to see. And then if you like good old grudge, what would kind of become a precursor to some of the ECW stuff, some of the more hardcore stuff. The Tennessee chain matches with Tony Anthony, the Dirty White Boy, and Tracy Smothers were bloodbaths, were psychologically strong. I mean, those two guys had a real good chemistry, and the crowd loved them both. So you've got hot crowds, bloodbath, brutal matches, and again, matches that built. They're just built to a crescendo. So there was a good little mix. Like I said, if you like the Candido Blaze style, if you like classic tag team, if you like hardcore angles, Smoky Mountain had a lot. Um, and those are the ones from my time there that I enjoyed the most. Uh, because again, especially like one of the biggest angles, or not biggest, but one of the most memorable angles before rock and roll came in, it was the Bodies versus Bobby Fulton and his brother Jackie, like the second iteration of Fantastics.
Yep.
They do this brawl in the back hallway, the Morristown High School gym. And again, this precedes ECW. So we had not seen Sabu jump through tables. We had not seen Ted Petty and Public Enemy jump through tables. We had not seen Ian and Axel Rotten doing Taipei death matches. So just seeing these guys brawl down a hallway, it was almost like the Tupelo concession stand brawl revisited, part 3. So those are really special stuff that were just, I thought, made the early days of that TV show something to see. And that's why I was always trying to promote it and get word out in the early days, because Jimmy was taking a lot of those old famous angles and making them work in current day. But those are some of, to me, the ones. If you're interested in learning about Smoky Mountain, and then anytime Bob Armstrong comes on your screen, whether he's got a commissioner tie on, whether he's got the singlet, and he's dancing to Bad to the Bone, stop what you're doing and learn from the master, because there's never been a baby face like him since. He was
What's
just
the what's the legacy of Smoky Mountain Wrestling? Well, what do you think? I mean, obviously, Bull Bob, huge legend. Cornette goes without saying, but what's the legacy of SMW?
to me. I think it was the territory that should have made it. I mean, you think, John, they wrapped up in December of '95. Scott Hall walks onto the set of Nitro 6 months later and sets the wrestling war on fire. This is a company that had all the right elements. They were 3 years too soon for their own good, but it was very, very good. It was good TV. It was good episodic. If you like Old Mid South, if you like a little Memphis hoo ha, if you like stories that made sense, I always felt Jimmy was very good at starting an angle, building an angle, and blowing off an angle. Not all bookers can do that. A lot of bookers can start something hot, but they can't finish it, or they lose track on the build.
Yep.
Even the Bloodline storyline right now. If you're following that, like, I don't know where that's going, and I almost get the feeling like they don't know where it's going. Jimmy's stuff, he knew before he started where it was going. So it was good TV. It was good wrestling TV. There were good promos. If you want to see the last real authentic baby faces, watch Bullet Bob, watch Tracy Smothers, watch Ricky Morton in action. They don't make baby faces like that anymore. People don't relate to the crowd and connect to the crowd like that. So to me, the legacy is a really good show. It's the last territory that, in the dying days of territories, and the real shame is, if they could have hung on financially, and if Jimmy mentally and emotionally could have hung on another 6 months and had some help, he might have been able to ride some of that wrestling boom that started right after that summer of '96. Yeah, but it should be remembered as a territory. A lot of great young talent, a lot of last veterans got their last, good run, and I would hate to think that its legacy is of Dairy Queen videos,
Hmm.
of the office kid getting his car smashed. Like they say, don't remember me for the bad, remember me for the good. And that was 3.5 years of really good TV, by one of the great bookers of the last 20 years, who did more with less than just about anybody else.
Guys, you're going to brush your teeth today? Why is that? Because it's a healthy part of your day and you don't want bad teeth. I want you to take it another step and add skincare habits to your daily routine. I just did, and I promise you I'm never going back. I am hooked on Caldera Lab high performance men's skincare products. Told you guys last time around that first impressions matter. Your teeth and your skin are the first thing someone notices about you. Backed by legit clinical trials that found 94% of men's skin showed an overall younger looking appearance after using the products for only a few weeks. Caldera Lab is the regimen you've been looking for. Habit stacking, habit hacking, whatever you call it, Caldera Lab is here to take your daily routine to skin royalty. Take my word for it, or one of the thousands of 5-star reviews. And just for our audience, we have an exclusive offer. This is the best offer available anywhere. Use the promo code POWERTRIP at calderalab.com and 20% off right now. That's right, 20% off using the promo code POWERTRIP at Caldera Lab and make an unforgettable first impression that leads to the charming words, "You look younger." 20% off at Caldera Labs with the promo code POWERTRIP. Get to calderalab.com today.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news.